Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A new COVID-19 variant has forced Ottawa to ban flights from southern Africa. Farmers and ranchers in BC prepare for more flooding as heavy rain is expected in many parts of the province. And the pro-life group, the Wilberforce Project, is celebrating following the recent UCP convention in Calgary. We will explain why.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Officials in British Columbia are encouraging residents to prepare themselves as the province braces for more storms. Government officials announced that they are reopening a section of the flood-damaged Trans-Canada Highway in BC. They say it will help connect the Lower Mainland to the interior.
We're redoubling our efforts to not only recover from the incredible destruction from last week's events, but to prepare and respond to the significant weather lining up through the next week. There are three big pulses of storms arriving with increasing intensity. The one we're seeing now, another over the weekend, and the biggest hitting around Tuesday. Environment Canada will continue to update the forecast, but the time to prepare is now. And for people to pay attention and be ready for the unpredictable weather that is coming to BC's coastal areas and the Lower Mainland.
However, I want to emphasize that while having the main artery open through the Fraser Valley is good news, it will not be travel as normal. Rather, it will be slow going with reduced speed limits, and people will, again, ask to be patient. Highway 1 will not be subject to a travel order. It will be available for general travel, but we are asking people to consider whether their travel is absolutely necessary. The Coquihalla was heavily damaged by the deluge of these historical rains. All told, about 20 sites have been damaged or washed away, and that is about 130 kilometers of the corridor that is affected.
The Government of Canada is banning the entry of foreign nationals who've traveled through southern Africa in the last 14 days. And the reason? The World Health Organization says a new COVID-19 variant has been detected in southern Africa called Omicron. The WHO says the variant has a large number of mutations, some of which are very concerning. The European Union is also banning flights from southern Africa as much of the world is dealing with the new COVID-19 variant. The new variant also hit the markets very hard today. We'll have more details in business news later in our program. There were some fireworks on Parliament Hill as Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland and Conservative finance critic Pierre Poilievre sparred over Canada's inflation rate. It created a lively exchange and question period. Poilievre said the Liberals should bear the responsibility for the increased costs of food, gas and rent, while Freeland argued that inflation figures are rising around the world.
Now that Canada has the second highest inflation rate in the G7, higher than the Eurozone and higher than most of our competitors, and the second most housing inflation of any country on earth, she has admitted that we have, quote, an inflation crisis. Congratulations for finally waking up to that. Will she acknowledge that this inflation is in fact a homegrown problem?
Mr. Speaker, I know that Canadians understand that inflation is a global phenomenon, and here are some numbers to back that up. Inflation in Canada in October was 4.7%. In the United States, it was 6.2%. In Mexico, 6.2%. In New Zealand, 4.9%. The G20 average is 4.6, and the OECD average is 4.6. This is a serious global challenge, not a made-in-Canada problem.
Federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole is not happy that the Trudeau Liberals want to create a hybrid parliament, having a large number of MPs not being on the Hill in person, but instead joining virtually. O'Toole says the Liberals are pushing for the hybrid model to duck accountability.
And why Canadians should be asking why the Liberals can gather in Glasgow but are out of sight in Ottawa. Why is the Prime Minister being such a hypocrite? What are the Liberals afraid of? The answer is obvious. Justin Trudeau has an aversion to accountability. They have no plan to fight inflation, and they need to cover up their ethical misconduct. A virtual parliament will limit the voice of Canadians. It will limit your voice. And we can't sacrifice that in our democracy.
Defense Minister Anita Nance says she's looking forward to working with General Wayne Eyre, who was made permanent commander of the Canadian Armed Forces. Eyre replaces Admiral Art MacDonald, who voluntarily stepped down during an investigation into sexual misconduct allegations that resulted in no charges. He's also retiring from the military.
General Eyre and I will continue to work hard in reforming the culture of the Canadian Armed Forces. We need to ensure that we have an institution where everyone who puts on a uniform feels safe and respected and protected. In addition, General Eyre and I will continue to work with our allies and our partners around the world to ensure that the international rules-based order is upheld.
Canadian pro-life group the Wilberforce Project and Canadian Physicians for Life are claiming a huge victory from the recent United Conservative Party's annual convention. A policy which was recently debated at the AGM was whether the UCP would officially support conscience rights for healthcare workers. That would mean that the UCP would be committed to protecting the rights of those workers who do not want to be involved in abortions or euthanasia. The motion passed by almost two-thirds majority. To discuss this in more detail is Cam Wilson, Director of Political Action with the Wilberforce Project, joining us now from Edmonton. So Cam, what does this commitment by the UCP mean to your group?
It means a lot because it means that, first of all, the government has a background of support from the grassroots of the Conservative Party, that they know that if they act on this, that the grassroots will be backing them. It also shows, in fact, where the grassroots stand on the issue, because over two-thirds of the grassroots supported this policy at the floor of the convention, which means that there's an overwhelming support for basic freedoms and for the idea that even if a person holds a viewpoint that isn't in sync with the majority of our society, that viewpoint still has a place and they should be allowed to have that worldview and still keep their jobs in a professional association.
That was Cam Wilson, Director of Political Action with the Wilberforce Project, joining us from Edmonton. Premier Jason Kenney acknowledged that there is a doctor shortage in some areas of the province, especially in the rural regions. Kenney says the recruitment and retention of physicians in rural areas has been a problem for years, but he says his government is addressing the issue.
The recruitment and retention of physicians and nurses, medical professionals in rural areas has been a perennial challenge for decades. We know that, which is why Alberta's government last year put an additional $80 million into rural physician recruitment and retention, and that's for about 750 rural physicians. So on average, more than $100,000 per. We actually do have more physicians working across the province today than at any point in our history. We are spending more on healthcare than at any point in our history. I know you read headlines about healthcare cuts, but in fact the budget has gone from $19 to $21 billion. We've provided $3 billion in surge funding to cope with COVID. We added nearly $1 billion to reduce surgical wait times last year. And our Minister of Health, Minister of Finance are working together to ensure that we have strong incentives for the recruitment and retention, not just of rural physicians, but also of nurses.
The province announced more funding help today for women entrepreneurs and support organizations working to remove barriers that keep women from advancing in business. The funds will also help women transition into a new career. The Women's Economic Recovery Challenge Grant Program will allow groups to apply for up to $250,000 in funding. It is open to a wide range of eligible nonprofits, industry associations, First Nation, and Métis settlements. Officials say the deadline to apply is January the 12th. Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley says affordable and universal internet is the right for all rural Albertans. Notley says if her party is elected in 2023, she will make that a priority that all Albertans in rural areas will have access to high-speed internet by the year 2027.
If my party is fortunate enough to be elected government again, we will ensure that every single Albertan has access to the basic 50-10 internet speed standard. This will be achieved in one mandate through our fully costed plan, which was released today on albertasfuture.ca. We estimate our proposal will create 18,000 jobs and generate an estimated $4 billion in GDP growth over 5 years. And the $520 million provincial investment would pay for itself in recouped revenue within 6 years.
Well, we had another beautiful day in the city once again as we had double-digit temperatures. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a quick peek at the weather forecast. Jeanette, it looks like a decent weekend is shaping up.
It sure is, Hal. We could possibly even see a record breaker as we head into 17 degrees on Sunday. Now, the record for that day was actually 15 degrees, so we'll see if we get there. More good news as well is that wind should be dying down a bit, at least for Saturday, as we head down into 6 degrees, back to single digits there before heading back into those double digits. I'll have more details about the rest of the weekend and next week coming up later on in the show.
Looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Many seniors in our city say they are in need of a friendly voice or message through a simple phone call. The Keep in Touch program, run by Volunteer Lethbridge, aims to pair volunteers with seniors in isolation. The program is currently seeking funding and donations to keep them going. The Alberta Mental Health and Addiction Funds, which support this program, will dry up by February of next year. Connie Marie Riedelhuber, the Seniors Keep in Touch project coordinator with Volunteer Lethbridge, says the fourth wave of the pandemic has caused seniors to feel even more isolated and depressed.
I really do hope that the loneliness will be less of an issue without COVID at the level that it is currently. But we also, again, we really are kind of grateful that it's drawn some attention to those that are lonely, and especially those that are housebound. So again, I still believe it needs some, it still needs programming. It still needs to be an issue that's at the forefront for seniors, an area where we can offer support. There will always be those that will need that support as mobility, especially as their mobility changes or their cognitive changes. Being housebound is not new, and COVID has just drawn a lot of attention to it.
Riedelhuber adds, from April of last year to September of this year, there have been close to 2,000 hours of volunteer engagement through phone calls. Since the program began, there have been 169 pairings, 85 volunteers, and 112 participants. The Southern Alberta Art Gallery has unveiled 3 new exhibitions. These pieces of art will be located at SAG, sharing the ideas and storytelling of local and international artists. As Micah Quinn explains now, the exhibitions will be available for viewing until February the 6th.
These beautiful pieces of art, called Under the Vast Sky, are the work of Britta Merikat Laba. Merikat Laba is a Swedish North Sami artist. The Sami are the indigenous people of Sweden, Norway, and Finland.
And all the works touch on different themes, whether they be Sami mythology and cosmology, global warming and climate issues, sort of everyday today vernacular scenes of Sami people and cultures and traditions, or whether they be more contemporary issues like this work here, Events in Time, which reflects on the Utoya terrorist attack in Norway in 2011.
The second exhibition in the upper space of the Southern Alberta Art Gallery is called Body Longing by Lethbridge artist Mandy Espizol.
They really relate to the gallery space, and she's drawn paintings that come outside of the canvas paintings and really interact with the 100-year-old Carnegie Library space that is our upper gallery.
If you go back downstairs, you will see the exhibition called There Were Nothing But Pedigrees All Around Us by artist Luke Johnson, who is an Edmonton-based printmaker.
These images are presented as postcards that people can take away from the exhibition, sort of like a reflection on, the weird things that you find in libraries that maybe you also take with you.
The opening reception for the exhibitions will take place tonight from 7 to 9 p.m., where you will have the chance to meet the artists and view their work. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Many times late at night, when you look up into the sky, you see a lot of satellites flying around. Dr. Craig Coburn is a professor of geography and the environment with the University of Lethbridge. He says NASA contacted his group recently to help with the U.S. Geological Survey. He says those satellites you see are vital for giving us important information from around the world.
This is part of a global effort that's been going on since the 70s just to monitor our planet. And I think it's incredibly cool. But we're able to convince them, of course, because a lot of people in the general public don't really understand that this is happening every day, all the time. But we're not up there trying to see if you're doing something nefarious. We're just trying to see what our impact on the world is.
Catch the full interview with Dr. Coburn and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up in the second half of our show. Lethbridge police have confirmed that a 48-year-old woman who was previously reported missing was found dead on the blood reserve. The body of Helen Perkins was located on Thursday after an autopsy was performed, confirming her identity. She was reported missing and last seen in Lethbridge on July 27th. The investigation into Perkins' death is ongoing by members of the Blood Tribe Police Service. Alberta RCMP have laid first-degree murder charge to 26-year-old Medicine Hat woman Melissa Lynn Martins-Lagasse in connection with the death of 34-year-old Megan Eekma from southern Alberta. Police sent out a composite sketch looking for Eekma, and her body was found in a rural area south of Pincher Creek on November the 19th. On top of first-degree murder, Martins-Lagasse is also charged with an indignity to human remains. She appeared in Lethbridge Court on Thursday to answer to those charges. Kids aged 5 to 11 were officially eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine today in Alberta. Premier Jason Kenney says the province received the modified pediatric Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine earlier this week. Since then, doses have been dished out at 120 locations around the province. Parents and guardians who want their children to receive the jab can book appointments online. Kenney says around 391,000 children are now eligible to receive the shots. The Manitoba government launched its campaign to immunize kids in the province after a pediatric COVID-19 vaccine arrived in Winnipeg. Officials say close to 25,000 appointments have already been booked for a first dose.
The clinics and pharmacies are also going to be getting their doses, so that's going to have a big impact on how many doses are going in. We don't book those centrally, so we don't know how many are booked for any given day, but we will start to see, once they get administered, those numbers coming in, and then we'll be able to report out to Manitobans how many doses were given. So it's been just wonderful.
Well, now our poll question this week is, are you planning on having your child age 5 to 11 vaccinated against COVID-19? Make sure you log on to our website, bridgecitynews.ca, and let us know your thoughts. We'll tabulate the results and have them for you next week. Canada Post launched a new commemorative stamp celebrating writer Margaret Atwood. Atwood says the honor has been a source of envy among some of her fellow peers.
Being on a stamp is an unexpected honor. So unexpected that it has already caused a rash of stamp envy in my peer group. Indeed, the first phone call I received on this subject was from a friend of my age, 1002, who exclaimed with a shocked horror that was only partly jocular, "But you're not even dead yet." To which the only possible reply is, "How can you tell?"
She has a wonderful sense of humor, doesn't she? Well, it was another windy day in our city, but those Chinook winds should be dying off, but the warmer temperatures will be sticking around. Full weather details are coming up. The strong Chinook winds continued for our region, but they also brought us warmer temperatures in southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is back with a full look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, do we know how long those gusty winds will be sticking around?
Well, you know how they will be sticking around at least for this evening, as we'll feel those 80-kilometer-per-hour wind gusts. Overnight this evening, that wind should be dying down for Saturday, though we're only going to feel about a 15K wind. That's pretty great compared to what we've been experiencing. Temperature also dropping to single digits, 6 degrees for Saturday, and then we're going to jump back up to the teens. It says 15 there now. Last I checked was actually 17, the high for Sunday, which could be a record breaker. Record was 15.6 degrees back in 1956, so we will see if we get there. On Monday, also looking at sunshine, 12 degrees the high. That 12 sticking steady throughout the midweek. Next week, Tuesday, looking at 12 degrees also the high on Wednesday, and then back down to 6 degrees for Wednesday, or for Thursday rather. 2 degrees is the average high for this time of year, -9 the average low. 17 was our high on this day back in 1939, and -34 was where we were at back in 1985. Sun rose this morning at 8 a.m. right on the nose, and our sunset this afternoon at 4:38 p.m., giving us exactly 8 hours and 38 minutes of daylight today. Heavy rain still expected on the west coast tomorrow, particularly in Vancouver. Vancouver over the weekend looking at 80 millimeters, 60 millimeters rather, 80 millimeters for the Fraser Valley and 120 millimeters near the mountains. That's for the whole weekend. 10 degrees the high in Vancouver tomorrow, 9 in Victoria, -1 the high in Edmonton tomorrow, and 2 degrees the high in Calgary with a mix of sun and cloud in those cities. As we look to the rest of the prairies, -3 expected to be the high tomorrow in Saskatoon. Same thing for Regina. Wind chill hitting these cities, especially in the mornings. 0 is the high for Winnipeg tomorrow with partly cloudy skies as well. As we look to the central part of the country, Toronto could see a chance of flurries. 2 degrees the high there, -3 the high in Ottawa, -4 in Montreal, mix of sun and cloud in both of those cities. As we look to the east coast though, in Atlantic Canada, this is where we're seeing a lot of precipitation build up. At Fredericton, looking at 2 centimeters of snow there. Rainfall expected in Halifax, high of 5 degrees. Charlottetown also looking at rain tomorrow. Expected high of 8 degrees, 11 the high in St. John's, Newfoundland. Also seeing rain there as well in the forecast. So there you go. That is your weather.
Stocks opened sharply lower on Wall Street today as many regions around the globe have been reacting to a new coronavirus variant. Health officials in Europe have moved quickly to propose suspending air travel from southern Africa as the variant was found in Hong Kong, Belgium, and Israel as well. The economic impacts are already being felt, and with airline stocks quickly being sold off and oil prices also falling sharply. Travel and energy stocks are among the biggest losers, while companies like Zoom and Peloton saw their share prices increase. Black Friday arrived with less fanfare than usual as retailers spread out sales and consumers scooped up deals early amid ongoing supply chain issues. The situation has cast a black cloud over the traditional shopping spree, which signals the unofficial start of the holiday shopping season. Experts say Black Friday has been expanding for years as retailers try to maximize sales by pushing discounts earlier into the fall. But the pandemic has accelerated the trend as uncertainty and supply chain problems have pushed deals even earlier. Supply chain issues have Ottawa and Vancouver Fraser Port Authority working together to ease bottlenecks at ports. Government officials issued a statement saying that Ottawa will provide up to $4.1 million to relieve congestion at Vancouver ports and address supply chain disruptions. The bottlenecks were caused by the aftermath of floods that severed all rail and road travel between Metro Vancouver and the interior. The statement said the plan will add container storage capacity by opening up an undeveloped 16-hectare parcel of industrial land in Richmond to hold empty containers. 2 Mexican regulators have approved Calgary-based CP Rail's deal to buy American Railway Kansas City Southern. CP is paying $31 billion for KCS in a deal that includes the assumption of $2.8 billion of debt. The 2 company shareholders are set to vote on it in December. CP expects the U.S. Surface Transportation Board's review of the deal to be complete in the 4th quarter of next year. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The new COVID-19 variant had a huge impact on the markets today. The TSX was down 487 points to 21,125. The Dow was down 905 points to 34,899. The S&P 500 was also down on the day, 106 points to 4594, and the Nasdaq was down 353 points to 15,491. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 1024 to 68.15 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 38 cents to 5.45 US. Gold was up 13.74 to 1802.59 US an ounce, and silver was down 44 cents on the day to 23.16 US an ounce. Wheat is at 12.68 per bushel, barley's at 9.71, canola's at 23.37, and corn is at $10.72 per bushel. Live cattle were up 20 cents to 138.10. Feeder cattle were up 23 cents to 167.15, and lean hogs were down 2.23 to 73.20. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 78.17 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Government of Canada is banning the entry of 4 nationals who have traveled through southern Africa in the last 2 weeks. A new COVID-19 variant has been detected in southern Africa called Omicron. The World Health Organization says the variant has a large number of mutations, some of which are very concerning. The European Union is also banning flights from southern Africa as much of the world is dealing with the new COVID-19 variant. Coming up, Jeanette Rocher chats with Dr. Craig Colburn from the University of Lethbridge to explain why NASA recently contacted the university for help. We'll have details right after the break.
Well, here in southern Alberta, science and agriculture go hand in hand. Today, we're talking with an expert in remote sensing and farming. Now, this goes far beyond your TV remote control and your grandparents' grain farm. Today, we have Dr. Craig Colburn joining us from the University of Lethbridge. Dr. Colburn's work focuses on the aspects of remote sensing science. All of the scientific research helps growers and researchers better understand agricultural crops and other biological systems. Dr. Craig Colburn, thank you so much for joining us today. So great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So first off, for those of us who maybe don't know or don't quite understand, start off by explaining exactly what remote sensing is.
Well, remote sensing is what we're doing right now. So we're watching, a television screen with our eyes. So we're viewing this. So if we think about taking that same kind of technology and putting it up into space, then we are using satellites to view the Earth's surface and to get information from the data that we derive.
Wow, that's so cool. And we don't really think about it because we just use it every day, don't we? So is your work and research really a high-tech bird's eye view of a farmer's field? Maybe explain that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Much of the research that we do is charged with answering fundamental questions like things like how are the plants growing? How is that crop developing? What can we expect in terms of yield? Those are sorts of really basic questions that people have asked for a long time. And again, from space, we're now able to collect data that can help us derive that piece of information that's needed in modern agriculture.
So was the study of remote sensing then just kind of a logical step of a transition for you?
It's one of the areas in geography that involves geospatial technology. So you'll notice that on cell phones and other things, you can't 10, 15 years ago, I used to have a hard time telling people what I did. Now I just tell them I make Google Earth work and they understand. But when I was doing my graduate degrees, I used to just tell people I made maps for a living, and that would stop them from imagining all kinds of crazy things that I might do. We're geographers, we make maps. These are the technologies that we now use in order to provide information to help manage and monitor our Earth.
That's so cool. So how long has remote sensing technology been around?
Well, we've had active space programs since 1972. We've always wanted to look at ourselves from above. I mean, it's just a human thing. Whenever you can get on top of a hill and look over where you were, it satisfies a human need to know. So it's an interesting thing. As soon as we were able to get airborne, one of the first things we put in a plane was a camera. We wanted to see it. And before we had planes, we had balloons, and we used to put cameras outside the balloons and take the same photograph that every farm I've ever been at has, usually hanging in the dining room, that shows you your farm. That we've been doing that since the 1850s. So these are the kinds of things that just people find it fascinating. They find these things really interesting. But yeah, we've been at it digitally monitoring Earth since the early 70s.
Okay, awesome. So what are some of the ways that farmers in southern Alberta are using this technology to enhance their farming?
Well, we can use it for really basic things like just trying to tell health and condition is probably the biggest one. So crop health and condition we use really typically, and it's not easily done, but it's reasonably straightforward. Let's put it that way, because some of this gets a little bit high tech, and I don't think people want me to go off and deliver that particular lecture. But we can also do things weed detection. That's a new and upcoming area of interest. There's all sorts of modeling that goes on that requires some kind of geospatial input. So that might be on the government side, where they're trying to model the bigger picture of how agriculture is doing across the country. So at every level, right from the producer all the way up to those folks in governments that are trying to organize how the whole system works, we are the people that are providing the data.
Well, that's really fascinating. So what have been some of the limitations in the past with this technology?
I think the number one biggest limitation was we just weren't ready for we didn't have the computing power. We didn't have the ability to visualize it. We couldn't get it to a producer for free, which we can do now. There were a lot of limitations. I mean, technologically, we still suffer that we cannot download all of the data that we can collect from space right now. So we're always pushing the boundary in terms of what we can do. So those were the limitations. Again, 10, 15 years ago, I always tell my students that in 1972, we barely had color television, and we didn't have a video game. My students have a hard time conceptualizing this, and yet we were imaging from space. We were doing the entire globe. So it's difficult for people to sort of capture that. But when you want to bring it right down to people and having these things being utilized in a daily way to manage a modern farm, then it's all about getting data, and it's all about making it usable. And so we've had to break down any number of barriers. There's lots of companies, some of them are in Lethbridge, many are in Western Canada generally, that are involved with taking those pieces of data and putting them into digestible bits that farmers are then able to utilize operationally.
Well, that's a really good way to describe it, sort of in a layman's terms. And how do they use it? It's amazing because you're talking about outer space, pinpointing down on a little farmer's crops there. So it really is amazing to me. How is it specifically helping them exactly?
Well, imagine the scenario where you've got, say, the ability to vary the rate of fertilizer application, or you might have some other variable rate technology. One of the things that you need as an input on the farm side is where would we do the application? So if we were going to vary the fertilizer, so if we can reduce input costs and we can get the same growth response from the plant, then we can go ahead and increase productivity and also put money on the bottom line. So when we do those sorts of things, then again, we've got satellites above, they've got giant telescopes, so they see a long way, and we can get it right down to some pretty small areas. And there's other technologies as well. I mean, we're not, there's unmanned aerial vehicles and other things that can be even closer to the target. But from space itself, then we're able to look down on those small spots on Earth, and we're able to take and collect the information that we get there. So we've got, in essence, what the color of the plant is. And then we will be able to do those kinds of variable rate pieces. So we give the information that allows the technology to operate.
That is very, very cool. Does this technology have applications beyond farming?
It's an interesting thing. Oftentimes my students get a little bit excited about it when I list off the number of application areas that are governed by remote sensing. So even if you just start by turning on the satellite, if you click on the satellite button on Google Maps, that's us. So every time you do any of those things, so it could be natural resource driven. So it could be agriculture, it could be forestry, it could be mining. Those folks are using it. It could be, say, for example, we want to watch urban growth. Where are people on this planet? Yeah, we do that. If you want to know how it is that we have information that lets us understand our impact on our planet generally, deforestation, global warming things, are the ice caps really disappearing? Well, of course, we watch that every day. These are all climate variables. We're monitoring CO2 in the atmosphere. These are all, there's a list that would go on. We would waste the entire show just covering the list of contributions that remote sensing makes to the monitoring of Earth. But we used to be in the background, right? So we used to be the people that enabled, we did the science and technology that enabled those data pieces to get pushed forward. Now people are starting to ask questions like yourself about, well, what exactly are you doing? I've talked to any number of producers and they say things like, you're spying on me. And I always say, well, yeah, but we have been since I was a child. This isn't new. This is, it's just that we're now making it useful. And you now know that, there's a large remote sensing group at the University of Lethbridge. There's 5 of us that are in the group. That's an unusual collection across Canada. We're one of Canada's largest remote sensing groups. And those are the things that we're interested in. So it's, again, if you name it, we're probably involved. If it involves geographical things across our planet, then we're there.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, maybe describe your development of a 6-band system, or better yet, tell us what the bands are, and then maybe about the development that you've made.
Oh, so I do remote sensing fundamental work. So I do remote sensing physics. That's my specialty. So I build things. That's the way I shorten it up. So if scientists can't build their own tools, then they're forced to ask the questions that those who do build the tools ask. I want to ask my own questions. And in order to do that, I have to literally get in and do a little bit of electronics. I do know how to weld, so I build giant robots and things. But I started building camera systems. So these were camera systems that were meant to be inexpensive. I developed, I don't even know how many now. It's quite a few, but if there's an imaging system out there, I've probably tinkered with it in the lab. So and then we would design those things. So the 6-band system that I developed, that was a long time ago, and it was developed specifically around questions to deal with the remote sensing of vegetation. So it's vegetation. If you don't have a farm, you don't eat and you die. So it's really important that we get high quality information about plants generally, but about crops specifically. So in order to do that, I developed a system that had 6 spectral bands. So we're going to place bands in areas where we understand from our biologist colleagues exactly what that plant is doing at that point in terms of how it's reacting to light. So that might be looking at how is it photosynthesizing? Is the chlorophyll active? Those kinds of things. Then we can tell from that, we can go, look, if we see that it's photosynthesizing this much, then we get this is what color it is. But our vision of color extends past what people can see in the visible light range, and we extend off into the infrared. And those are the tricky bits to sense, but we can do that kind of work.
Okay, so Dr. Coburn, this is all like super exciting, but maybe talk about what's the latest and greatest, most groundbreaking stuff that you've done in the past week or month, say.
Well, Jeanette, the most important thing that we've done, and probably for me anyways, in the last few weeks, is the University of Lethbridge with me at the helm was part of the team that was doing the calibration for United States Geological Survey and NASA's latest satellite mission. So Landsat's the most important Earth observation satellite system to date, and we were part of a global team that was out doing the calibration of that sensor.
Okay, so what exactly does that mean? What do you do? What did it do?
Well, the fun part there was when you get a phone call from NASA, you usually pick up. And when they ask if you'd be willing to join the global team to do some calibration for their latest $1 billion satellite effort, you also say yes. And then it was mostly about finding a willing, in this case, a willing rancher down just south of Bow Island who has a grazing lease, and we thank him very much for the opportunity to go out and wander around in this marvelous area of reasonably native prairie. And it's a big, wide area. It's very consistent in terms of its tone. And we just happen to be, so we do research in that area, and we just happen to be in exactly the right spot to help the global calibration effort. So they were putting their current satellite and the next satellite were flying on the same path, which is almost never done. It only was going to happen for a few weeks, and we did happen to get a nice sunny day in southern Alberta to go out and provide data to the United States Geological Survey as well as NASA in order that they can calibrate that sensor.
That's amazing. I'm just curious, when you're researching the land and you contact these ranchers and farmers, what's their reaction?
They oftentimes are confused. They don't realize that we're watching, and it's not for the reasons they think. This is part of a global effort that's been going on since the 70s just to monitor our planet. And I think it's incredibly cool. But we're able to convince them, of course, because a lot of people in the general public don't really understand that this is happening every day, all the time. But we're not up there trying to see if you're doing something nefarious. We're just trying to see what our impact on the world is. So and those are the interesting pieces. But oftentimes they wonder, like, you can see me. I remember when I've contacted several folk, especially in the ranching side, and I'll ask them about their land, and I'll say, well, I need to get over into this area. I need to be in the southwest corner of this particular field at this time. and I see that there's a power line and that you've got a pen over here, and they're like, how are you doing this? And I'm like, look, I'm in Lethbridge, but I'm actually on the government website. I'm able to call it up. Like, I can just zoom in and I can see where that area is, and I can see there's a power line, and I'm going to be at the second power transmission tower, and I need to be in about halfway into your field. Is that okay? And they oftentimes are quite surprised that we can get that kind of detail from space. And I'm always on the other side, because for us, those of us that do the research, we always forget that people don't know that we do this. So there's always this very interesting little moment where they realize that we know, and we realize that they don't know. And then we come to a meeting in the middle somewhere, and we have to tell them that this is okay. This is how we monitor the entire planet. You're not special. We're not even interested in you. We're just going to go out, have a look at what we can see.
Amazing. And Dr. Coburn, if people want to learn more about your work or this technology, where can they look?
University of Lethbridge does have a website. I've got a certain amount of stuff that's up there. I am the department chair, so you can always find me. I'm relatively easy to find. A lot of our work, of course, is published, and those things are all sitting in the public domain, so they're available for people to read. If you need the Coles Notes version of it because it's a little long and it gets a bit boring, then you're always welcome to send me an email, and I'll try to respond to as many questions as we would get.
Awesome. Dr. Craig Coburn, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate hearing about all the great research taking place at the University of Lethbridge, as always.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Far too many people have suffered sexual abuse, and it remains a difficult thing to talk about with others. Recovery from abuse is difficult, but some individuals do seem to be able to recover. Today's guest knows what this is all about. We are joined by Cora Jean Blaylock, who now helps other women find freedom from the trauma of sexual abuse, and is the author of Moving from Violated to a Victory. Welcome to Bridge City News, Cora Jean. So great to have you on today.
Thank you, Jeanette. I just feel so privileged and honored to be here.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you. That's amazing. Now, Cora Jean, can you maybe share a little bit about your personal story, your personal journey as a child of abuse?
Sure. Being born into a family, a home life that where sexual abuse was an issue, a pedophile for a father, and a mom who wasn't trained well. Her mother had abandoned her, and she just didn't know how to deal with it. And so what she chose to do was sort of hide and deny. So of course that's the perfect storm, right? So it just lets the issue keep going. So it carried on until my father was killed in a car accident when I was 11.
Wow. So you have experienced some hurt, and you've also experienced some healing, and you suggest that healing involves both physical and spiritual wholeness in your book. So how so? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Healing is definitely possible. We serve a God who describes himself as Jehovah Rapha, God our physician. So he's wanting to heal us. We know he's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So whatever we find in God's word that talks about healing, we can hold on to those words, and we can apply them to our lives, and we can walk into victory. I wish that it was a magic wand and that it could happen, overnight. But that's not typically how it works. We discipline ourselves under righteousness. All of us who are seeking to follow Christ are doing that. And this is really no different. It's just that for some of us, we have a lot further to walk. We have been, maybe in some very dark places. We've grappled with torment, despair. The list goes on. But God is bigger than that, and he is able to bring us into the life that we've imagined for ourselves, a life of abundance. So we don't have to live in that darkness. We don't have to live in a cycle where we continue to create for ourselves kind of just horrible experiences, really, because when you're trained in trauma, that's how you live your life.
Okay, well, it's interesting that you say train that, because your book also talks about learning to retrain your body. So what do you mean by this exactly?
That's such a great question. And it's not that easy to answer, really. But the path is simple, and it comes back to faith as well. My body, well, in massage therapy, what we generally talk about is how the muscles have memories. Okay. So, like if you've broken your leg, for example, you're favoring that leg for a long time, aren't we? And then we learn to use it properly, we gain more confidence, and then we forget and we treat it normally. But when we've been maligned, physically in abuse, any type of abuse really, but because we're talking about sexual abuse, that typically has to do with our reproductive organs, and that area in the body in general. And I'm not suggesting we go in and touch that space specifically, because we still want to honor the body and reverence it and maintain our privacy and dignity. But the upper legs, for example, carry a lot of energy from the reproductive area. And to go in and touch that space, to bring awareness to it, forgiveness, to intentionally say, I have been hurt here, and I am going to bring nurturing. I'm going to bring comfort. And so often these areas are ignored. We just say, well, I've dealt with it, emotionally and mentally, so I must be fine. But the problem is, let yourself get married and allow your husband to touch you, and bam, you can go right back to that place. Flashback. I mean, it comes back to you. And the gut, the Chinese have long called our stomachs our emotional brain. And that area also requires retraining.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that you were around 11 years old when this stopped. So what happened after that? How long was it before you were able to heal? Did your mother help you after that? And were you able to get the help that you need, or did that come much later in life?
Well, my family did their best. My mom, she left, and we lived with my father's mom and dad. And all I'm going to say about them is they did their best.
Yeah.
But they weren't prepared to deal with this stuff.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about the 80s. Nobody really was, at least not in the circles we were in. But I did have some really good help around the time I was 20. A lady by the name of Charlene Hansen. She actually runs a program called Women of Courage. She taught me how to pray. She taught me how to apply God's word to my life and to believe it. And that has made all the difference for me. I never found much help in counseling, to be honest. Talking about it is very important. To share your story, that's a very important first step, breaking the silence. But once you get there, you need a program, you need something to apply to your life to change it, a teaching, in other words.
Yeah.
So.
And I think when it comes to that type of abuse, maybe spiritual healing might be the only way to really break through that. I don't know. I can't speak from experience. Only you can, Cora Jean. And I'm really just so sorry that anything like that happened to you.
Oh, Jeanette, you're so right on. Spiritual healing is paramount. We need God. We need Him to come in, because when, He breaks the chains. And without that, even the physical healing isn't going to do it for us. It's mind, body, spirit. I mean, it's our hearts, it's our souls, the whole thing. They talk about the first 5 years being the most important formative years of your life, right? You have to go back and retrain all that, and it does. It's the Spirit of God who really does the work for us.
Now, Cora Jean, why is there confusion that surrounds recovering memories of sexual abuse? Do you have to dig all of that up in order to heal, or why not just let those memories of the past stay buried?
Yeah, I think that retrieving your memory is very important, but I don't think it's vital to remember everything. I think that it's really difficult to believe ourselves, and it can be very difficult to break the silence, to talk about it to others, because it is a horrible thing that nobody wants to believe has happened. And they don't want to believe that anyone they know would do that, and especially if it's within your own family. Um, and there's a code of silence. There's this unspoken hush command that wants to keep us silent. And even if the abuse is not happening, still they don't want anyone to talk about it, you know. But really and truly, the only way to gain freedom is to talk about it. And we know that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. God's word has told us that what has been whispered will be shouted from rooftops. God already knows. That is the most comforting thing that ever came to me in the area of memories and dealing with this, because it's very shameful when you're the victim, even though you are the victim. Like, it's not my fault at all, yet I have to carry this load of shame. But God already knows. He already knows it all. He remembers everything. It hasn't passed by him. It hasn't slipped by. And so when we bring truth, when we trust God to help us bring truth, he says in the Psalms, "Surely I desire truth in the inward parts." We need truth. We need truth for health. I mean, I think we know that, you know, in our own experience, even in our personal relationships, if there's a lie standing between myself and someone else, however little, it's going to cause a problem. And this is a big lie if we don't bring it out and trust God and begin to trust ourselves, and the Holy Spirit will help us remember what we need to know. But let us not get caught up on remembering everything or convincing people, because some people are going to not believe and misunderstand you regardless of what you do.
Wow. Did you ever within yourself learn to forgive your father for doing, like, and is that part of the healing? Do you have to forgive them?
Jeanette, thank you for asking me that. I love forgiveness. There is so much freedom in forgiveness. There's so much magnificence in forgiveness. Forgiveness is not saying what you did is okay, so I'm going to forget about it. Forgiveness isn't even really for the perpetrator. Forgiveness is a gift to me. Forgiveness sets me free. I don't have to be angry. I don't have to have a judgment about it. I can just look to God. I can look to myself and say, look, it's you and I, God. Let's deal with this and forget about that guy. I mean, you know, the good book says we've got to forgive people 7 times 77 times, right? What I've learned is the reality is sometimes you have to forgive that many times for the same act. And that could be anything that hurts us, right? But still, it comes to mind, I don't want to forgive. I don't feel like forgiving. This is the worst thing you could have done to me. So I'm not going to forgive you. You deserve for me to hate you. But we're not talking about what people deserve. We're talking about a supernatural empowering from God himself, who has said, I will help you forgive. You're not going to feel like it at first. I didn't feel like it. Some days I still don't feel like it. But then I say, God, you know, I surrender to you. Your way is best. Help me. Change my heart. Give me the desire. And with my will, I can forgive, even if I don't forgive with my feelings.
Mm-hmm. I know, Cora Jean, how did you bridge that gap between an earthly father and what he did to you with the heavenly Father?
Well, I have been blessed with a really great church family. And so I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I've seen many examples of really spectacular earthly fathers. But some people don't have that opportunity. What it boils down to is we just have got to believe God. We just have to believe him. We've got to read his word and say, Lord, I believe that you have chosen me. I believe that all your thoughts toward me are good. I believe that you didn't let this happen, that you didn't want this to happen. But we live in a fallen world where people have free will. And without free will, relationships are meaningless. We're robots. But we have to deal with each other. We have to deal with each other's weaknesses and faults. And a lot of times those things are played out on one another. So we put our trust in God and we say, Lord, I believe you.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know there are, of course, viewers who have experienced sexual abuse. So what message would you like to leave with them, Cora Jean?
Don't give up. Never, never give up. And trust God and read your Bible. And I'm standing in a field of victory. I have more than I could have imagined right now. God cares about you. His eye is on the sparrow, and he wants to see you walk in wholeness. Just don't give up.
Yeah, it's a good message and words of wisdom as well. Thanks so much for being with us today, Cora Jean. We really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Jeanette, I can't thank you enough.
Of course. Cora Jean Blaylock is the author of Moving from Violated to Victory, available at www.gutsandvictory.com. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.